Section 2 of 11 Stories by Henry Hasse. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Cinda J. M. Proktols of Neptune, Part 2. The brain was huge, 5 feet or more across, convoluted and pale but red-streaked. A dome of glass enclosed it. Beneath the bulging pale pink mass was something that might have been 2 tiny eyes and the veriest excuse of a chin, but from their distance the earthman could not be sure. Venaric's voice droned on, beating through their numbed consciousness. You are wondering about the brain. Long ago, one of our race, one far ahead of his time, created it. In a period of 6 months, he advanced evolution from a single cell through all its stages to what you see now, the the brain, down there, is the most advanced evolutionary product yet to exist in this solar system. It slew its creator, but seemed to exhaust all its energy in doing so. For a long, long time it lay dormant. Such scientists as were there at the time tried to activate it, for they knew it wasn't dead, but their efforts were clumsy and futile. Then one day it began to pulse and think again, feebly. Do you know when and why? I think you could guess, Commander Janus. It was the day the shining stone came flashing to land here. That event caused a tremendous religious hysteria among the savages, and it wasn't hard to connect that with the brain's revival. The brain was absorbing the accumulative mental flow that was impacting against it. Of course, it has long been proven that thought is material just as light is material. Of the 3, Janus alone was beginning to show a gleam of interest as he listened to the toneless words. I think I see the whole system now, he said bitterly. Periodically, you pull this ritual business and get those little savages down there religiously worked up in order to... The idea was so ghastly he choked on the words and couldn't go on. In order to keep the brain mentally activated, Venaric finished for him. Precisely. To those savages, it is nothing more than a religious ritual brought about by the revenge motive, but to us it is a scientific necessity. The brain teaches us much. It was the brain which thought out all our technicalities of space travel and most of our other achievements. By now it realizes we have no intention of letting it die, but periodically its thought processes seem exhausted. When it feels that happening, it informs us. Then we must activate it again. Through the accumulative mental hysteria of those 1,000 little Proktols, it is easy to steal their shining stone, keep it safely in our custody a while, and bring some hapless spacefarer here for them to vent their hysteria upon. A little complex and a little sardonic, but very necessary. Janus listened, nodded dully. He was remembering the huge fleet of spaceships they had seen waiting out on the desert, but he did not mention them. Instead, he said, And right now, what scientific problem is the brain working on? Venaric seemed proud to talk of the brain, appreciative of Janus's scientific interest in it. We can never tell what the brain is thinking, he explained. It propounds scientific theories to us. We put them to the test, and they are usually practical. But this I know. Lately, a change has come over it. We are sure it is planning something big. It never used to question us much, but now it is beginning to, about other planets, the solar system, the universe. Then it ponders. You see, it has never been away from here. It is restless now, and I think it has ambitions. But we shall learn its plans when it has thought them through. From the astronomical data we have furnished it propounds vast calculations. Mathematically, it is supreme, and it ponders. Now suddenly the sound burst forth into a tremendous surge of unified shrilling. Hysteria. That's the word Venaric had used, and this sounded like it, as if something interesting is starting to happen. They turned quickly to the window again. Yes, something had begun to happen. There was a wide flow of red down Kettrick's cheek. The sharp-fanged little beasts under the cage had begun their work, just as Varnick had said they would. Another of them darted forward, Kettrick's head jerked, but it was useless. Another flow of red started down. Again came the surge of hysterical sound. No man should have watched that scene long, but they couldn't tell how many minutes they stood there at the window. Blake cracked first. He whirled away suddenly toward the doorway. But Venaric had silently gone, and the crackling sheet of flame across the entrance filled the room with a bluish light. Blake stood tottering a moment, horror still in his eyes, a little moan deep in his throat. Then he staggered over and flopped into a bunk at the side of the room, turning his face away. Janice and Devries continued to look, but only for a few minutes more. Venaric had said those vicious little animals were hungry. Now, becoming bolder, they darted frequently at Kettrick's twisting head only a foot or so away. Kettrick didn't utter a sound, but every time another red streak started, they saw his features were contorted. Pretty soon, they couldn't even see his features. His eyes were shut tight, but once he opened them and twisted his head around and saw the men looking down, he tried to smile, but it was a grimace. He called, "Devries, remember what you swore. Do it. Get back to Earth if you can. Then bring men out here and blast these devils to the hell where they belong. If you promise somehow to do that, I won't mind this so much. Don't watch anymore. No telling how long." Kettrick stopped on that word as his head jerked violently away again. And all the while came the shrilling from the immense watching throng. The men heard it rise and fall, in regular cadence. They could almost feel the impact of the hate going out, the hate for that earthman who supposedly had violated their sacred stone. Those savages didn't wish to tear Kettrick limb from limb. They had been trained in this, and it was a better revenge, more to their enjoyment. A little apart, carefully guarded, was the huge brain, grotesque and convoluted under its glass dome. Janice even thought he could see it pulsing rhythmically as the bursts of sound and thought force swelled out to it. That tangible force was being absorbed, and gradually the brain was taking on a deeper hue than the pale pink. Savagely, the men paced the stone room. They examined the electrical barrier across the door, which was too obviously deadly. "How long does that go on?" Janice asked in horror, nodding to the window. "To the very end, I'm afraid," Devries replied. Twice more in the following hours he moved to the window, only to look quickly away when he saw the horrible thing was still going on. He couldn't see Kettrick moving anymore, but the beasts were still at work. And then, it must have been hours later, Devries woke from a fitful sleep. He was conscious that all was silent as a tomb below. He crept to the window and saw that a weird kind of greenish, shadowy nightfall had come over the place. All those savage Proktols had gone away, and the brain was gone, and the square below was empty, save for Kettrick. He was still there, and the cage was still over his head, but it was empty. Thank God, Devries thought, it's all over for him. But who will be next? When next he awoke, it was day again, or what served for day on that shadowy world, and the first thing he saw was Blake over at the window. "You fool! Come away from there!" Devries cried, springing up. "What good is it to watch? It's all over for Kettrick anyway." Blake turned to face him, and Devries saw a look in his eyes similar to that he had seen in the Martians. "He's alive. Still alive!" Blake cried. "And it's still going on." It was then Devries heard those sounds of hate surging up again and knew that the throng had again gathered to watch. But it was Blake's voice and the look in his eyes that made Devries' blood run cold. "And I should be down there instead of him," Blake said, but the voice didn't sound like his any longer. Devries should have watched him closer. He turned to wake Janice. Blake sprang suddenly past him toward the doorway. Devries made a grab at him and missed. Blake leapt straight into that crackling sheet of electrical blueness. But he didn't get through. He seemed to hang suspended in the air for a few seconds. Then he crashed to the floor across the doorway as the electrical flame enveloped and crackled over his body. There was nothing they could do about Blake except keep their faces averted from the entrance where his charred body lay. but they couldn't close their ears to the waves of sound that came up from below. It seemed even more suggestive than before. Blake's words kept hammering into DeVries' brain. He's alive. Still alive. Blake had been the last to look out the window. DeVries hated to think of what he had seen down there. Grimly, they examined the room again. Although they had done so 100 times before, 2 bare stone walls, and the third wall, the window, far too narrow, and the adjacent stone solid and unmovable. In the fourth side, the doorway, open except for the deadly sheet of blue crackling across it. That's the only way, DeVries said, nodding toward it. I'm sure Venaric would be around here again. When he comes, watch for my nod and we'll make a rush. If we die, at least it won't be the way Kettrick did. Venaric did come again. He stared down at Blake's charred body and shook his head distressfully as he shut off the flame. He motioned for some of his men to take the body away. That is too bad, he said. Very wasteful. It leaves only 2 of you. He nodded to the window. It will soon be over for your friend down there. And I regret that. The fools have allowed it to progress too rapidly. Janice's attention was more on the flame pistol than on the words. He glanced quickly at DeVries, but the latter flashed him a look that said no. Venaric must have seen it. He raised the pistol slightly so that it leveled between them. You are quite right, he said. It would not be wise. Janice tried to engage him in more conversation, but Venaric seemed to know his purpose. He left, still watching them carefully as he shut off the flame and stepped out and turned it on again. His last words were, I will leave you to decide between yourselves who will be next. It will be soon. Janice whirled angrily. Why didn't you take the chance? Now we're sunk. We'll probably never have another. You're wrong, DeVries replied. Empty your pockets, quick. Janice stared at him uncomprehendingly. That slot in the doorway, DeVries explained. I watched how Venaric worked the key. I can't hope to duplicate it, but if we have a pocket knife or something, we might make a short circuit. Should have thought of that before. Already he was searching his own pockets, and Janice quickly followed his example. But their hopes waned. Neither of them had a knife, and what was worse, they had nothing else that might serve the purpose. DeVries turned away in despair. Wouldn't you know it? And I always carry a knife. All except this time. Janice was still searching. Suddenly he gave a shout as he produced something from an inside pocket. A round, flat metal object. DeVries saw it was an ancient $50. He'd seen very few of them, and only in museums. My good luck charm, Janice said wistfully. I've carried it with me ever since my first space flight. DeVries seized it eagerly. We'll see how lucky it is. He examined the narrow slot in the doorway, but its length was considerably less than the diameter of the coin. Nor could he tell how deep the slot was. We've got to get this down to proportion, DeVries said grimly. Even then it may not work, but we've got to try anything. He began rubbing the edge of the coin against the bare stone, and the rounded edge flattened infinitesimally. Quite a job on our hands. We've got to get this diameter down to less than half. Taking turns, they kept at it, holding the coin in strips of cloth to protect their fingers from the heat of the metal. While one worked, the other watched the doorway. Occasionally a Proktol passed by, but Venaric did not come again. Once Janice moved to the window and ventured to look down at the brain again, but carefully kept his gaze averted from the spot where Kettrick was. Now he could distinctly see the huge mass of the brain pulsing with the impact of the thought force that swelled out to it. And now it was not pale pink, it was red. It was even more than blood red. It seemed fiery. He could sense the pulsing power of it, the supermental force, and it seemed diabolic. Here, he knew, was a dangerous thing, a thing that should not exist in this solar system. Do you know what I think? Janice said, turned back to DeVries, who was working again on the coin. That brain is mad. It's bound to be. God knows how long it's been receiving those Proktols' thought force, living and thriving and planning on it. And that thought force is hate. Venaric said it's getting ambitions. Ambitions for conquest, I think. That's all that fleet of spaceships out there can mean. They worked slowly but steadily with the coin, gradually wearing its diameter down to fit the slot in the doorway. What they feared mostly now was the Proktols would be very soon through with Kettrick down there, and one of them would be next. But luck was with them. Suddenly, startlingly, the green shadowy nightfall came again. "Listen," Devery said. All was silent again in the square below. He rushed to the window and saw the throng dispersing. The brain on its portable platform was moving away into one of the buildings. Apparently, the ritual was over for the day. "We'll have to work fast," Devries exclaimed. "This side of the planet's away from Neptune now. We don't know how long it'll last. This is our last chance." They worked frantically, risking skinned fingers on the stone wall. About an hour later, Devries tried the mutilated coin in the slot for perhaps the 20th time, and this time it fitted. But would it reach as far as Vernarik's key had reached? Devries wrapped his fingers carefully with strips of cloth before he tried. For a moment, he thought it was useless. The metal touched nothing. Clumsily, he managed to slide it forward a tiny bit more, and the silver oblong barely touched a hard surface. Instantly, at the contact, there came a sputter of fused metal. The silver became suddenly hot under DeVries' fingers. Sparks leapt out and burned his hand, but he didn't care. He suppressed a joyous shout as the sheet of electric flame across the doorway ceased. They sprang through the door and stood a moment in the dim corridor listening. Evidently, their tampering had caused no other alarm. They moved swiftly to the stairs leading down into the square. Peering down through the greenish dusk, they could see one of the Proktols at the bottom of the steps, evidently on guard. Devries gestured downward, and Janice nodded silently. Those steps were solid stone, and they negotiated them silently by all Earth standards, but they had forgotten these creatures had super-sensitive hearing. They weren't over halfway down when the Proktol sprang up, whirling to face them. Devries acted on sheer instinct. He made the remaining distance through the air in one prodigious leap. The Proktol had reached for its flame pistol, at the same time opening its mouth to sound an alarm. But there was only a shrilling gasp as Devries' shoulder caught it in the middle and hurled it backward. Devries climbed to his feet, a little dazed. Janice took only one look at the Proktol and saw that the frail body had snapped in two. Quickly, he confiscated its flame pistol. They stood quite still, listening, but there was no alarm. In some of the radiating streets, they could see the weird glow of many-colored lights moving about, but the square seemed empty now in the gloom. They started to move across it when something caught Janice's attention. He stopped. Only a little distance away, a stone pillar rose from the dais. A dark blur of a figure still sagged there, with a wide wire cage over its head. Janice stared through the gloom. He knew it was Kettrick, but there was something vaguely wrong, unnatural about it, something he could not immediately make out. He moved swiftly nearer to find out. Devries, knowing what he would see, called a warning, but Janice didn't stop. He didn't stop until he came very near, and the full horror of the sight burst suddenly upon his vision. The ritual had gone on to the very end. Through the ghastly greenish dusk, all that Janice saw was a white gleaming skull upon a still living body. He knew the body lived, for he saw it still breathing, faintly, and he saw one of the outstretched hands twitch, and from somewhere in the throat he heard a horrible little gurgling sound, as though the skull were trying to speak. The brain, of course, had not been touched, but Janice knew the brain within that skull must now be mad. He could no longer think of the thing as Kettrick. In those few seconds that he looked, Janice felt his mind slowly slipping away into a chaos of vertiginous horror. But he caught it on the brink. Instinctively, he raised the flame pistol, aimed, and made very sure that the thing which had been Kettrick no longer lived. Devries gave a cry of warning. 4 or 5 thin, shadowy figures were leaping from a nearby street. They had probably seen the flash of the flame pistol. Devries tensed. "For Lord's sake, fire! Let him have it!" he cried hoarsely to Janice, as the creatures bounded nearer in long leaping strides. But Janice stood there, swaying a little, still dazed by the sight he had just seen. Devries leapt to his side, snatched the flame pistol just as the Proktols came within range. One of them reached for its pistol. At the same time, Devries let his flash out in a sweeping path. He was about 2 seconds quicker. The Proktols' momentum carried them straight into it, and they crumpled with hardly a sound. Devries grasped Janice's arm and shook him out of his daze. "That way," he whispered, indicating a wide street across the square. "It's the way we came in. If we can get out into that desert, we might steal one of those spaceships we saw." But the delay had been fatal. Other Proktols had seen the flash and were hurrying toward them. Janice stopped to snatch up a fallen flame pistol. Then they were leaping away across the square. But they didn't get far. Now, not dozens, but hordes of Proktols were converging on the scene. The entire square seemed to resound with their shrilling cries, bringing others. The Earthmen hadn't even time to wonder where they all came from. Most of them were the smaller savage Proktols, unarmed, but some of the others with flame pistols were trying to press through. As the men swept their flaming fire around, the savages fell back in shrilling panic. Scores of them were burnt down, but more of the creatures kept surging in. The Earthmen knew it would only be a matter of seconds before the sheer mass of the creatures overwhelmed them. Still, they pressed forward, slowly burning a way through. For some foolish reason, Devries remembered shouting at Janice, "These flame pistols are all right as a toy. Wish I had an atom blast." Then the shrilling coppery devils were closing around, clawing. Janice brought down some more with a sweeping blast, and Devries did the same, but the flame charges were getting very weak. Then the Earthmen stared. The savages were no longer pressing around them. They were fleeing away. For no reason at all, they saw the space ahead of them open up. They saw a long, clean swath of Proktols topple like grain cut down by a mower. Those that did not fall fled frantically, shrilling in thin terror at a strange, invisible death. The men couldn't quite understand what had happened, but they took swift advantage of the miracle and darted across the now open square. But the larger Proktols weren't so superstitious. A dozen of them, now unimpeded, came leaping to intercept them. But before these Proktols could raise their flame pistols, they toppled too, cut clean in two. All was clear around the men now, and they paused to catch a breath. "What the devil was it, Janice? What happened?" "Pure luck. I knew that lucky piece of mine couldn't fail." But just then a figure emerged from the dark shadow of a building and ran toward them. It was a familiar figure. It held 2 atom blasts, one of which it thrust into Devries' hands. "Luck nothing!" Devries yelled, recognizing him. "It's Ross! How did you escape? We thought you died on the Wasp." "Not quite," Ross said. "Come on, this is no picnic. Let's get out of here before those devils stop wondering what an atom blast is." The men turned and sprinted for the open street ahead of them, but they hadn't taken 5 steps when Devries felt a crushing, numbing weight upon his brain. He staggered, fell to his knees, trying to rise but couldn't. Then he fell flat as a force hit him like a giant invisible hand. Agonizingly, he wondered why the others didn't help him. Then he saw that they too were lying flat, dazed and panting heavily. With a tremendous effort, Devries twisted his head around and looked across the square. He saw the huge brain under its glass dome. It was pulsing with a fiery, angry red radiance, and Devries knew it was the brain's tremendous thought force that was reaching out and crushing them there. His right hand, still grasping the atom blast, was doubled under him. Desperately he tried to move it, and did. About an inch. It seemed to weigh a ton. With a tremendous effort that took all his strength, Devries managed to slide his hand around so the atom blast was trained on the brain across the square. With his last ounce of strength, he pressed the power button and held it there. Devries knew his aim was good, but that dome over the brain must have been of tougher substance than he thought. It didn't blast, although he held the weapon there for about 5 seconds on full power. But the brain must have felt the menace. There came a great surge of anger, and the atom blast was suddenly torn from Devries' hand as was the one Ross held. Then the men were jerked to their feet by the same invisible force which had held them prone upon the pavement. The brain, still pulsing angrily, held them there until dozens of the official Proktols came and grasped them. Not until then did it withdraw the powerful thought force. Janice and Devries, with Ross accompanying them this time, were hurried back toward the building from which they had just escaped at such pains. Now Devries saw the huge, green, glowing Neptune rising swiftly in the heavens, and realized that day was here again, and already the hordes of savage Proktols were coming again into the square to await their ritual, which would undoubtedly continue so long as there were victims. "Too bad you had to come here, Ross," Devries said dully. He was utterly without hope now. They had come very close to escape, and they would have made it had it not been for that diabolical brain. Devries was just wondering how he could die, but not the way Kettrick had, when they heard a great cry go up from the gathered throng behind them. And it was a cry of fear, or awe. Despite the wiry arms that held them, the men twisted around and looked back. Coming toward them, low over the city, was a rocket plane, and it was undeniably an Earth type of plane. The Proktols holding the three men jabbered excitedly in their own staccato language. Then, still holding the men, they hurried to the shelter of the nearest building and crouched there. It sounded very much as if they had seen this rocket plane before and feared it. The Proktols, crowding in the square, were trying to flee too, but before they could all disperse, the plane was over them, letting loose a wide swath of death. From the extent of it, the Earthmen judged that the rocket plane must be carrying a portable atom blast nearly as large as the patrol ships carried. It swept over the square once, veered sharply, and came back. This time the atom blast swept very close to the line of buildings where the men crouched. Their captors broke and raced for shelter. But the Earthmen were not yet free. As they crouched there, watching their unknown benefactor, they felt the fierce surge of power from the brain again. It alone did not flee. It remained there on its platform in the middle of the now deserted square. And if it was angry before, it was raging now, with a crimson, crackling radiance. For it was the brain which was the object of the rocket plane's attack. A third, fourth, and yet fifth time the plane came sweeping back over the square, and each time it did so, the Earthmen could feel part of the crushing thought force which the brain hurled upward at it. Invisible weapon against invisible weapon. Atom blast versus the brain's supermental force. And the brain fought tenaciously. Such was its power that the rocket plane was caught in its grip once, veered crazily, and almost buffeted down until an extra burst of rockets sent it zooming away. The watching Earthmen felt that power too, and were sent spinning, bruised and battered, against the building where they crouched. But the plane's atom blast must have begun to find the range, because soon the brain propelled itself toward the shelter of one of the buildings. It was angry, but it was intelligent. It recognized the danger of that atom blast. The transparent dome encasing the brain was of very tough material, but it would have soon crumbled under a few direct and powerful blasts. It was not until the brain had withdrawn to safety that the tension eased, and the men dared to leap across the square again, strewn with the ghastly remains of numberless Proktols. This time they were not apprehended. The mysterious rocket plane was speeding away toward the desert, but the destruction had been so terrible that the remaining Proktols didn't care or dare to emerge. Devries spied one of the atom blasts that he or Ross had dropped. He snatched it up, stopped, and looked back speculatively, weighing the weapon in his hand. Janice pulled at him. "Come on. You don't know when you're lucky." "Yes, but I'd like to take at least one good blast at that brain after the way it slapped and battered us around." Devries stumbled along after them unwillingly. "Have you got the Wasp?" Janice finally managed to ask Ross. "I didn't get here through the fourth dimension. It's out on the desert there, just about a mile from here. I had a close call when they turned that flame on the Wasp. I got to a spacesuit just in time. Kept their ship in our visipanel long enough to see that they were heading back for Neptune. Took me hours to repair the Wasp, and hours more to find you. Ross very prudently didn't ask about Blake or Kettrick, and Janice was glad of that. They reached the Wasp and lost little time in blasting out into space. "What about that fleet of spaceships we saw down there?" DeVries asked. "Can't we go down and blast them off the map?" "It would take days," replied Commander Janice, "and we're lucky to be away from there as it is. But—" "Haven't you had enough action this trip?" Janice snapped. "Look," Ross said suddenly, pointing down at the tiny satellite they had just left. Blasting out into space from that planet was a sleek, black spaceship. Janice exclaimed, "That's Perrin! I'd recognize his ship anywhere. That must have been his rocket plane we saw fighting with the Brain. And we came out here to get that pirate." He leapt on the radio, clicked it on. "Attention, Perrin! Perrin, in the Princess! Commander Janice of Earth Patrol Ship Wasp speaking. We now have our long-range blast trained upon you, and you cannot outrun a patrol ship. You will please go into drift while we come over to board you." A voice replied almost immediately, calm and a little amused. "Very well, Commander. Do not get excited. I was just coming over to you, but if you wish, come to me instead." The rockets of the Princess immediately ceased blasting, and the pirate ship drifted just a few hundred miles away. The Wasp drew near and made contact. Janice spoke again. "Our lock is ready. I should prefer that you came across, Perrin. No tricks." A minute later, Perrin stepped through their lock with his hands held high, mockingly. He was tall, darkly handsome, with straightforwardness that put Commander Janice ill at ease. Perrin smiled and looked down at his belt. "My pistol, Commander? That is customary, I believe." Janice stepped forward and took it. Perrin lowered his hands and said, "That is better. I was going to come over anyway and see who it was I saved down there. I thought you were Earthmen, but I wasn't sure." There was a slight mockery in the words. Janice flushed a little as he said, "This is damned awkward, Perrin. You did save our lives, but we were sent out here to get you. You're wanted on 3 planets." "3? I thought it was 4, said Perrin, still smiling. "But I quite understand, Commander, and I asked no favors. As for saving your lives, that was a side issue. I really came to take a crack at that Brain. What did you think of our duel?" "Interesting," murmured Janice. He was still uncomfortable, wavering between his duty and his debt of honor. "Yes, wasn't it?" Perrin said. "You know, that thing's getting more powerful than I ever thought possible. Oh, sure, I've had a couple other encounters with it. It's too canny to let me get a good crack at it. But how it hates me. I've been hanging around out here to see what it's up to." "Then you know about that fleet of spaceships down there," DeVries spoke up. "What do you think? Is that Brain going to direct that fleet toward the inner planets by remote control?" "No," replied Perrin reflectively. "That's not too fantastic a thought, but the Brain's not that powerful yet. However, those Proktols might man the ships. I think that's the plan. Did you notice those antennae they have? That's the way the Brain contacts them, and it might control them from any distance. Another thing, did you notice their flame pistols? Modeled after the ones the Martians use, but an improvement. If you men left any atom blasts there, the Brain will soon find out how they click, and they'll turn out their own, and they'll be an improvement. That entire space fleet will be equipped with them. But that fleet's not quite ready to move yet. They've got to have fuel." "You mean," said DeVries, "they haven't any?" Perrin laughed softly. "They did have. Those Proktols were mining it on Neptune. Greenish grain stuff, something like the titanite we get from the Mars mountains. I watched their operations a while secretly. It seemed to be pretty hard stuff to get out. I waited until they had quite a supply, then I swooped down and blasted it all sky high, together with a few score Proktols. That's just one more reason they hate me. But they're still mining, and getting more of that fuel out." Janice had been listening to the pirate's words. Now he paced the control room nervously. "That would give us time," he said softly to himself. "We could get back to Earth in a week at full speed." He stopped and looked up. "Yes," he said aloud, "we're going back to Earth immediately." Very well, Commander Janus, said Perrin, looking straight at him. But I trust you will take the princess in tow? I love that ship very much. Not you, Perrin. You're not going. Not me, Commander? I wonder what you can mean. The pirate's black eyes were glowing. Perrin, suppose I should get very careless and you suddenly escaped. I wonder where you'd escape to. Perrin glanced out at the glowing ball of Neptune. He was smiling again, but it was a grim little smile. I have a hideout, he said, which not even those Proktols have found yet. I imagine they have a lot more of that fuel mine by now, and I just love for them to hate me. Janus glanced at the space lock and turned his back. When next he looked, he saw the trim black princess speeding unerringly back toward Neptune, 1,000 miles away. Devries alone was regretful, almost bitter. He weighed the familiar atom blast in his hand. And I didn't even get to use this. Damn it, Janus, you know what that brain's doing. Planning. If they keep on with those sacrifices, feeding it that mental force, who knows how far it'll go. It's a potential menace. It oughtn't to be allowed to exist. Devries stopped gibbering. Once again, Janus was in his familiar role, commander of the WASP of the Earth Patrol. Ross, stand by in rocket room for orders. We're on double duty now. Yes, sir. It's a pleasure, sir. Ross hurried away. Devries, start charting our course for Earth. Yes, sir. Devries turned to the charts, disgruntled but obedient. Janus took over the controls, but a moment later he turned. I know it, Devries. Don't think I'm forgetting what they did to Ketrick and what we promised him. You see, that's why I want to be sure of making a thorough job of it. Yes, sir, Devries said again briskly, and he was satisfied. As the hideous green ball of Neptune rolled away behind them, he didn't even look back, for he knew they'd be out here again, and soon, with more than a patrol ship and a few atom blasts. End of section 2.